Okay, folks, good evening, and welcome to tonight's Fairfax County Democratic Committee National Affairs Forum entitled How We Win the Information War. I'm Sandra Klassen, the forum moderator and FCDC National Affairs Committee chair. This forum is being recorded. Our national affairs forums examine matters of national importance for the purpose of informing, engaging, and inspiring the kind of citizen action that is especially vital for these perilous times. I first want to recognize and thank those who contributed to organizing, co-sponsoring, and promoting this forum, with special appreciation to my National Affairs Committee colleagues. Although FCDC is hosting, this has become a statewide Democratic effort. We appreciate the nearly 50 Democratic committees and caucuses across the Commonwealth of Virginia who, clearly understanding the critical nature of this issue, have joined us as co-sponsors. We also thank Greg Brandon of the FCDC Central Communications Committee for promotional and technology assistance, as well as the many ally organizations who helped advocate for this forum. After my introduction, our program will proceed in two parts. In part one, our experts from across media fields will deliver presentations that explore strategies to tackle and overcome the left's media deficit and to build media ecosystems, infrastructure, and capacity that fight mis and disinformation and support democracy. Unfortunately, I regret to inform you that one of our panelists, Joan Donovan, has informed me that she is ill and can't be with us tonight. On behalf of all of us, I want to send her our best wishes for a speedy recovery. After our now four speakers have included their formal presentations, we will proceed to part two, Q&A. I encourage forum attendees to write your questions for the speakers in the webinar Q&A box throughout their formal remarks. And please specify to which speaker or speakers you are directing your question, or if it's for all of them. During Q&A, I'll ask my National Affairs Committee colleagues to read some of your and some of our committee prepared questions to the panelists. Okay, let's begin. We convene at a moment when the stakes for democracy could not be higher. We are not only confronting the spread of mis and disinformation, we are living with the results of a systemic, long-term, and coordinated strategy to dominate the American information landscape. Despite broad public majorities backing Democratic policy on healthcare, wages, education, and reproductive rights, our messages still struggle to break through. That isn't just a messaging problem, it's an infrastructure problem. Decades of deliberate investment built the asymmetry we face. The corporate mobilization set in motion in the early 1970s with the Powell Memorandum and the removal of broadcasting guardrails in the 1980s with the repeal of the Fairness Doctrine cleared the path for a coordinated ecosystem of dark money networks, right-wing religious organizations, think tanks, policy shops, and digital platforms. As Ann Nelson, investigative journalist and author of Shadow Network, documents, that ecosystem became permanent infrastructure. It cultivates right-wing cultural identity, distributes conservative ideology, and sustains influence between elections. And as renowned Professor Noam Chomsky argued in Manufacturing Consent, the concentrated wealth dominating such a vast system turns media into a filter. It narrows what people believe is real, relevant, possible, or even visible. That machinery now runs through Project 2025, being implemented by the Trump administration, politicizing and weakening the Federal Communications Commission, defunding public media, rolling back speech protections, and delivering state-controlled messaging. And the current juggernaut of consolidation is further concentrating gatekeeping power. Fox News is a partisan national media empire. Nexstar controls the CW and operates News Nation. Sinclair imposes partisan, must-run editorials across its local stations, and iHeart syndicates marquee conservative talk to thousands of affiliates, while Trump-aligned billionaires acquire the largest media pipelines, from Skydance's control of Paramount CBS to the emerging U.S. control structure for TikTok. Fewer independent local outlets and platform-level amplification, including X, tilt the field against public interest journalism and democratic voices. Meanwhile, the progressive media landscape, despite its creativity and talent, remains fragmented and under-resourced. Thousands of local news outlets are gone. News deserts grow, trust erodes. As media scholar Robert McChesney reminds us, a democracy requires a free press protected from market failure, monopoly power, and ideological capture. Journalism is not a commodity, it is a public good. This forum is about the strategic necessity of building democratic media infrastructure, trusted, distributed, creator-driven, and permanent, so we can counter disinformation, reach new audience, design resilience, scalable models, and shift from reactive communications to proactive, year-round power building. We are joined by 4 accomplished panelists who aren't just diagnosing the problem, they're building what comes next. To start the discussion, it is my privilege to introduce Milo Vassallo, Executive Director of the Media and Democracy Project, which is a nonpartisan grassroots 501c4 membership organization fighting for more informative and independent media operating in the public interest. He has also spearheaded initiatives seeking regulatory oversight of major media outlets, including a prominent campaign against Fox News. Mr. Vassallo, we are eager to hear your remarks. Please begin.
Sandra, thank you for that incredible introduction for the event and setting the stage for what myself and my esteemed colleagues are going to discuss in the next hour or so. You really did a heroic job summarizing 50 years of failed media policy in this country in really very insightful. So thank you for that introduction, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to you. And also thanks for the different civic orgs that co-sponsored this event with you, and thanks for shepherding this into being. This is a subject near and dear to my heart and those folks in the Media and Democracy Project. As you mentioned, we're a 501c4 nonpartisan organization who really are just advocating for a better informed America. I am going to share some slides as part of my conversation with you all this evening. I will definitely be sharing those slides with attendees afterwards. They do have some hyperlinks. And I'm going to do my best to flesh out a little bit of what Sandra gave in her overview and explain why we think as citizens we need to engage in media activism, specifically in media reform. And then I'm going to close in my slides with 3 different slides that'll kind of outline what we think are some of the actions that we can take as individuals, as communities and civic orgs, and frankly, what the Democrats and people who care about democracy should be thinking about larger term in terms of bigger order issues on changing the information landscape in America. So I will, without further ado, jump into my slides for this evening. We are the Media and Democracy Project. Our subheading is what activists and you can do. Sandra outlined the incredible headwinds of what the information landscape looks like, and it is not going to fix itself, and passivity will not fix it. So it's great to have wonderful co-panelists this evening who have engaged in specifically creating solutions to the information crisis in our country. What we see specifically in thinking about in the Media and Democracy Project is it's a combination of factors, as Sandra outlined, of uninformed, disinformed, misinformed, and non-voters in America. And we need Americans to have a shared set of facts before we can even try and tackle issues such as climate crisis, inequality, healthcare. And right now there are multiple factors that are going into Americans not fully understanding and sharing a shared set of facts. And an informed America is certainly not a partisan issue. So I'm going to give an overview of how we see the battlefield. We are a big advocate for journalism and Fourth Estate folks and cartoonists who are doing really a wonderful job making some of the complex issues we face very straightforward. This is a wonderful cartoon by Mike Lukovich from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And this is a cartoon actually before Donald Trump attempted to rename the Gulf of Mexico. But it shows that there's really a Gulf of America, and they're the kind of uninformed and somewhat disinformed voters and informed voters. And we have to figure out a way to get Americans to better understand a shared set of facts. And so this is one, I think, a very useful starting point for my portion of this evening is that Americans went to the polls in 2024, and this is a specific Ipsos poll asking Americans if they knew a specific fact about the economy, about the unemployment rate. Did Americans know that unemployment was at a 50-year low? A high percentage of Republicans, but also 40% of Democrats had a completely incorrect and inverse answer and misunderstanding of a basic, what should be a shared fact. And all of the factors that go into this are people not having access to good information, very powerful right-wing information media infrastructure. But this is really striking, and this shows us the work that's ahead of us. If Americans went to the polls in 2024 and even 40% of Democrats misunderstood that and thought that unemployment was at a 50-year high, when in reality it was a 50-year low, you can imagine that there's a lot of work to do to better inform America. The founders definitely understood the importance of informing a fledgling democracy. There's a great James Madison quote: "A popular government without popular or shared common information is basically, or the means of acquiring it is but a prologue to a farce, a tragedy, or perhaps both." And there's a classic Thomas Jefferson quote: "If it were left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter. But I should mean that every man should receive those papers and be capable of reading them." So it's kind of neat to hear that the founders recognize you can't just set up this thing called democracy and expect it to work on its own, that information was central to the concept of democracy. And that's why we can see this unfortunate synergy between a collapse in local journalism and quality sources of information, the impact of right-wing media, and our democracy simultaneously. It's a combination, as I mentioned, of misinformation, disinformation, and a lot of Americans not getting quality information. This is just a graphic of just showing that Americans now are getting information in ways that the founders could never have imagined. It's not newspapers, it's Twitter, it's Twitch. It's depending on basically, sometimes people are spending 4 hours a day on their phone. Some of it's passive information seekers, some of it's active information seekers. And a lot of this, as we're about to cover, is not organic. And that's the big thing to emphasize, is a lot of these asymmetries are not just that there's a more effective messaging on one side or the other. It's that there have been massive investments. This is a bit of a busy slide, but it's an overview of some of the dominant media and right-wing oligarch controlled of major news organizations. I've had to adapt this slide in the last couple of months as Paramount and the Ellisons continue to make motions to even potentially buy and basically subsume Warner Brothers Discovery. So these are some titans of media getting stronger in a deregulated environment with basically the support of a Trump and MAGA FCC. We see in red circles the influence of the Murdoch empire, Rupert Murdoch and Lachlan Murdoch, now his heir-to-be, in terms of control of that, dominating Fox, as well as his acolytes now in charge of both the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. Next, we'll talk a little bit about unheralded, but looming on the horizon is the impact of the Ellison family in terms of not only have they altered the structure of CBS News in the last week, but they will also be making a significant effort to be one of the American stakeholders in TikTok. And so their empire is growing and actually kind of meeting the demands of the new information environments, specifically with TikTok. So in case people aren't familiar what's happened with CBS and Paramount, we have the Ellisons have made multiple changes to the structure of CBS, not re-signing Stephen Colbert and engaging with a government overseer of CBS News, a right-wing journalist, and Barry Weiss overseeing the news division as of yesterday, and also making plays specifically for TikTok and Warner Brothers. They're continued to grow, and we make a point of this as individuals and activists that we choose to spend our media dollars. This is an overview from Media Matters of YouTube and its dominance by the right, that many of the influential people, voices on the right, have very large presences on YouTube, and many of these folks had their foundations with support from right-wing oligarch donors. Twitter has become a very asymmetric playground, so to speak, for the right, and this is another piece of information from Cap Action, which shows the scale and scope of the reach of right-wing accounts on Twitter versus what are presumed to be liberal or democratic. So the question we ask our community is, how are people and why are people necessarily on Twitter? The House rules are rigged against folks, reality-based news and democracy. Sandra mentioned the term news deserts. There's data specifically of how many congressional districts don't have a newspaper or even don't have a local journalist, and sometimes they have a paper that spans several of the congressional districts. But the question that people should ask themselves is, how can we support and specifically engage, because we do need to rebuild local journalism, and we're going to hear from some of our wonderful panelists later some of the solutions out there. But there are news journalists. You may not be personally in one, but we have to address this as a nation. For folks who aren't aware, the Silicon Valley executives have a major role in either filtering or multiplying or spreading in disinformation. We saw that potentially with some influence of Google and YouTube historically. They've removed those restrictions and are now enabling disinformation on their platforms. This was a dinner recently of most of the Silicon Valley executives at dinner at the White House. And there's a regulator who can regulate certain aspects of our media ecosystem. And this is the current chairman of the FCC, who's an avowed MAGA loyalist, and that's Brendan Carr. He's got a Trump brooch there that's a gold bust. And he's been wielding the power of the FCC to weaponize it against the individual and force some of the sale and some of the impacts of on CBS and CBS News, and has threatened multiple of license renewals for multiple stations. And of course, folks on this call probably remember not that long ago when Jimmy Kimmel was pulled off the air because of the words uttered. We can basically do this the easy way or the hard way in terms of getting Jimmy Kimmel off of the air at the behest of Donald Trump's wishes. So we do know several things about that. That was a very important moment for those of us in the media and democracy space, that people actually paid attention to the FCC, that Robert De Niro played a fantastic comedic character of the enforcer for the chairman of the FCC, did more good than we've ever done in explaining to people the importance of the FCC. The idea being also that consumers have power. Remember that people are starting to cancel their Disney subscription, and that was actually ultimately what brought people back to, basically brought Disney to bring Kimmel back. This is Bob McChesney, who's one of our heroes, who passed last year, but basically him and former Commissioner Nick Johnson have reiterated over the years, whatever your first issue of concern is, media had better be your second, because without change in the media, progress in your primary area is far less likely. So the world has changed. How people communicate, how people message, and how people understand their world. This is an old-fashioned somebody doing smoke signals, and a lot, unfortunately, of messaging that's done by the Democratic Party and others is really not specifically caught up to time and caught up to speed. So it is time to recognize the landscape and engage. So I'm going to run through just some quick suggestions as my time winds down of what we can do as individuals, as groups, and also at the national level for a better informed America. So number one, what can we do as individuals? We're an activist group. We ask our members to consider that we have power individually and as a community. So number one, curate a healthy diet with intention. A lot of people eat what they're used to eating, but we think of media as a diet. And so you can willfully choose what you subscribe to, where you spend your money, where you spend your time, what links you share. So support local news. That is actually a pro-democracy action. We're going to show a little bit of some of the strategies how you can find that, support independent journalists, and demand that and advocate that local news orgs make reality and democracy a priority. We talk about doing some media criticism and outreach. We engage journalists as accountable allies. We need news orgs to recognize and meet the moment. We need to, as individuals, stop supporting platforms that do not support democracy. And we also need to literally start to fight back against the platforms that do spread disinformation. And we can talk about the concept of breaking up big media, breaking up big tech. And also we have social capital, share good news, share good links, give subscriptions to people of good local outlets. A reminder, there's going to be an opportunity to use your First Amendment rights to spread and information. We think it's for folks who are going to be engaging in the upcoming No Kings demonstration of our First Amendment rights to think about supporting a free press. And all the other messages that go out there, we think it is essential that people recognize that we have a role, even if we're not journalists, to defend journalists, advocate for journalists and news orgs. There's some signs here that people have we've curated. One of them is free press or fascism, defend press freedom, and journalism is not a crime. And this sign protected by the First Amendment. As civic orgs, things we can do, some of the similar ones that we can do as individuals, but specifically devote a group or community of your civic org to media accountability and form potentially a media watchdog group. We need folks to use their power of their organizations to advocate for media, reform, and also engage to local news outlets and engage with your community. There's a real opportunity there that's underappreciated as civic orgs to engage with local outlets who are much more likely to engage with emails and response and cover events, and stop supporting platforms that do not support democracy, and of course, as organizations supporting news orgs and civic orgs that are pro-democracy and pro-democracy media. And lastly, what could Democrats do that they're not doing? Number one, recognize it's an actual war. That giant messaging infrastructure has exploded in the last 50 years with intention, as Ann Nelson has described, and thank you, Sandra, for mentioning her book. It's an actual war. And so it is important that step one is recognizing there's a problem. There's a great quote from Matt Sheffield, which is Democrats have historically been thinking that party platforms are going to be the most important thing in getting voters and winning elections. And Republicans have recognized long ago that media platforms basically trump and supersede party platforms. So we need people specifically in the Democratic Party and people interested in democracy to literally advocate for media reform. And it'll be essential to break up big media and break up big tech. We've seen the problems of that in the last several weeks and months. Especially, we need people to support reform and support the orgs doing that, like Free Press and MMFA and the Media Democracy Project, and also to support reality-based journalism. That's something I'd like to emphasize is Democrats, unfortunately, need to do two things. They need to make sure that we're supporting reality-based journalism and also ultimately develop partisan media. A lot of attention has been since the last election and forming Democratic influencers and that sort of stuff. But unfortunately, Democrats have to be the grown-ups in the room and be the ones that actually make sure that we have reality-based journalism and we think about funding local news and nonprofit news, and specifically that it needs to be a second but specific goal and role of the Democratic Party. Additionally, there's an opportunity to block some mergers. Right now, there's huge deregulation about to take place in local TV ownership. Basically, there's going to be supercharged Sinclair and supercharged Nexstar. So we, as people who care about democracy, should be thinking strategically as how do we block those mergers and in the future break up some of those large organizations and envision big picture, a media agenda for citizens.
1 minute, Milo.
Perfect timing. Thank you. We need a big picture citizens media agenda. What does the American landscape of media look like in 10, 20 years from a pro-democracy standpoint? We need to rewrite the Telecommunications Act, and we need to use and think of using the FTC and FCC to create a pro-citizen and pro-democracy agenda. For the Virginians on the call, there was a piece of state legislation here to support local journalism. This will be in the slides in the 2025 session. It was HB 2514, introduced by a state representative, Alfonso Lopez, and that was to give a tax rebate for folks to put advertising in local papers. So it's an indirect way of using the power of the state to fund in a nonpartisan fashion local news. And then lastly, you'll get a link. You can go to the Media Democracy Project local journalism directory. It's 50 states. It's searchable. And this is a good way to find some local outlets. And there's about 2,200 in there. And so use this as an action to find local news important to you and those about you and those in your community. And then lastly, thank you. Help us advocate for a better America. And I turn it back to Sandra and look forward to the rest of the evening. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Milo. I can tell you, Delegate Alfonso Lopez is going to be thrilled that you cited him. Thank you very, very much. We look forward to hearing more from you during the Q&A segment. It's now my good fortune to introduce Kevin Dreyfus, who is a multiple Emmy, Webby, and Clio award-winning media executive and currently managing director and executive producer at Courier Newsroom, one of the fastest growing and largest progressive digital media organizations in the country. Before joining Courier, Kevin built and managed video, creative, and organizations for the Harris for President and Biden for President campaigns. And before that, he led content strategy and business transformation at AMC Networks for iconic franchises including The Walking Dead, Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, and Mad Men. Please proceed, Mr. Dreyfus.
Mr. Dreyfus, I like that. Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction. Milo, amazing presentation. I think I'm going to be a bit of a broken record with Milo. I think we'll have cover some of the same ground. But I also learned a lot. So yes, let me start sharing my screen and hopefully not mess this up. There we go. Hopefully everybody sees. Winning the information war, media for the movement. Okay, so you introduced who I am, my journey going from entertainment into politics, running video for Biden and Harris, and learning the lesson there that just what Mara just said, that the story was not about policy and ideology and party platform. It was about the vibes, attention economy, media diet, the impact of culture, and that obeys no election cycles. It doesn't roll around every 2 years. It's a constant battle that's going on all the time. Can I switch screen? Okay, just a little bit about Courier. We are the brand that all of your kids know about. That's how I learned about this brand. My 16-year-old would be sending me TikToks and they would all be from Courier. And I'm like, who the hell are these people? And how are they getting young boys to be interested in politics? So that's how I came here. There's 8 million plus total audience, publishing over 1,000 pieces of content each week. The national side, which was what I run, has 4.6 million followers on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. We have higher engagement than CNN on TikTok. There's also have a local side that has local newsrooms in 11 different states, including here in Virginia. The Dogwood, which I mentioned here, has a mix of local cultural content and political news content. They're playing the game of, they're sort of walking the walk of both just being a local news source that is non-political, telling you where your local farmers market is and who won the high school football game, but also being able to be a fact-based news source. They also run a local creators program. I bet a lot of those creators are watching the debate right now as we have this session. They also have 34,000 email subscribers of their own. And I'm going to talk about this in a little bit. In addition to newsletters and our social platforms, we have a series of long-form shows that enter into non-political conversations. Culture, tech, celebrity, and entertainment. We have nearly 1 million download streams and views there. And the whole point in there is to affect this kind of vibes and culture economy, which is one of the ways we can turn around the situation we are in. Part of that situation, I'm going to run through some facts here, some of which will overlap with Milo's. 1 in 5 Americans consume their news from online creators today. That's rising to 1 in 4 Americans under 30. That means that where you think people are getting their news, where they're getting their views, they're not even going to call it news. It's not where you think it is. Just saw this slide, just saw this incredibly scary chart with all the big red bubbles, and you just heard the facts that this is not some wellspring of natural, free-flowing fascism that just got here. It was a concerted effort with a lot of dollars and effort behind it over decades to get to this point, a concerted and well-funded effort. And they also recognized that it wasn't just about controlling information systems, also cultural systems. And that means understanding how culture is upstream of politics and how understanding how these algorithm-powered social channels work and these podcast platforms work, and how to pull those levers to capture as much of the attention as possible. I think there's a little bit of the tech fake it till you make it kind of approach here. A lot of these brands and sort of voices that are huge now were essentially propped up for years and years at a time by right-wing money until they could achieve the escape velocity and really achieve their full flower as they are now. But there has been a progressive response. There has been since the election, and even before that, a recognition that there is a need to play in these spaces. Places like Courier, where I am now, The Bulwark, Midas Touch, David Pakman, Keith Edwards, probably know a lot of these voices. They are mostly in the political space. However, if you look on the left, this is the most recent in the last week. This is some of the biggest news and information sources on TikTok currently. It's an interesting chart because it's not what you would think. Even though TikTok, even in its current state, has a bit of a right-wing bias, and we'll have even more of that when it is taken over by the Ellisons. blue and progressive and neutral voices do have a place to play here, and we can say from our own size that we can, there's an ability to affect the conversation here. I think if you look at that little blue bubble down here, you'll see Courier bigger than CNN, almost as big as ABC News, big as MSNBC. There is a lot of places to play, and there's a lot of growth here happening. So there is some good news happening. Why? Few things. One, losing really clarifies the mind. It allows you to think about things that you never thought you would be doing, allows you to try different things, open up to experimentation. That's where we are. Two, this sort of speed run to authoritarianism has really jolted, I believe, the entire left side, not the entire country. How fast it's happening, perhaps outside the party leadership itself, everywhere else, you're seeing a ton of urgency around new ideas. Third is, and Milo, I won't get into the details because Milo just ran this down amazingly, the capitulation of mainstream media, the consolidation of ownership of mainstream media outlets under Trump-aligned billionaires. It's just in some ways removed the illusion that the mainstream media can act as a good faith bulwark pushing truth or democracy. Everybody can see that it's not the case anymore. But even though there has been a change in attitudes, the real work begins now. The right wing began these efforts that we are seeing full flower of now during the Obama era. You look at a couple of these charts on the right, both of these, TPUSA, Prager University, started in 2010 or 2012 at scale. They had ongoing funding from right wing billionaires, ongoing experimentation, created their own incubators for different voices and creators. And most importantly, and I'm going to probably say this about 4 times during this presentation, ongoing financial support. This is not something that you can launch, set it and forget it. You are creating an interactive ecosystem that is constantly propping each other up, is constantly advertising on each other's channels, constantly washing money in and out of each other, and using that to create scale over time. Okay, so some of what we were doing, as I mentioned, at Courier is trying to find some unconventional ways into this information environment, and trying to find new ways to combat the right here. So one, there's a few principles here. I'm going to go through them. There's going to be some video. I'll play some clips. I'll probably run out of time. I'll share this after the fact. One, enter into non-political spaces. Don't cede ground. Everything's political right now. A lot of the shows on the right are not even, they are talking about MMA or women's wellness or celebrity gossip, and then they are sneaking in MAGA talking points, red pill talking points. It's a tried and true. On our side, we have a show called Panic World. It is a show about internet weirdness and meme culture. Every episode takes you down a rabbit hole of bizarre internet culture that you never knew existed. They're super funny. They're really interesting. It is not a political show. However, when one of the biggest stories in years rolled around, the Charlie Kirk shooting, and everybody was scrambling to try and figure out what it all meant, who this guy was, what did he sort of scrawled on his bullets, our host was an expert in it because this person was sort of spawned from one of these weird dark corners of the internet. We immediately rushed out the episode we had already done on this, and then he was all over mainstream media on PBS NewsHour and other outlets, sort of explaining this and being able to say it to combat any kind of and really effective pushback against, oh, this was some sort of left-wing Antifa killer. You had somebody who was an expert coming from a non-political lens. A little bit of what he talked about is here.
I'm not hearing that. Is
there no sound?
I did not hear the sound. Liz, did you
We
hear
can't
sound?
hear the sound.
No,
When you share, you need to be able to enable sound to share.
Oh, we just did this before and it worked, didn't we?
Yeah.
Huh. Well, it worked before, it doesn't work now. Trust me, it's a good video. We'll keep moving. At any rate, I think what's important is that this is not a political show. He was able to enter into a really important story and really get across information that would not have been accepted if it was coming from a political side, some sort of political side. Okay. This is an important one. Honestly, you don't need to hear the sound on this one, but do not be afraid to fail, and do not be afraid to fail again. Republicans, the right wing, has no problem with experimenting, trying stuff, watching it crash and burn, and then just doing it all over again. On our side, we are deathly afraid of doing something that hasn't been pull tested, tried over and over again. And if it falls apart, then we will never try it again and never learn anything. So you won't be able to hear this, but you may have seen this video. I will just play it so you can see it. This was an incredibly cringy video that the House Dems put together, showing some of electeds doing Choose Your Fighter Super Smash parody. It was mercilessly mocked. But the lesson isn't here that it was just sort of cringy. The lesson here is that we tried something and then completely abandoned it after it received a ton of blowback. If you try to look for it now, you will see what's there on the left, video unavailable. It was literally disappeared. We need to understand that the internet buries all sins. We can try things and just move on, and that's how we're going to learn what works. Okay, third, stop reacting to polls and get proactive. One of the secret sauces we see in being so huge and social in places like TikTok and Instagram is that in some ways, social media engagement does not lie. The captured media can ignore Epstein. The Democratic Party leadership can say this is a distraction, or be scared to talk about things like immigration because they feel like some polls tell them not to. We will see in real time that that's not the case. The example there in the middle is when everybody was saying stop talking about Epstein. Every time we drop something about Epstein, we would see this was one of our most popular posts, 13, 14 million views on this on TikTok and Instagram. One other thing we note is that this is a little saying we have here: when you're going to go up to the bell, just ring it. We don't play hide and seek with our headlines. We say exactly what things are. We acknowledge that this is how this next gen is. We're not going to bemoan the fact that they don't read past the headlines. We're just going to make sure the headline says everything for them and go there. On the left is just, we're seeing as the party leadership gets more and more sort of hesitant and poll tested, we're seeing new voices rise. Graham Plattner is somebody running for Senate in Maine. And we started to see, when we started sharing his social media videos on our channels, he got pop and started showing across not just left, but right and center, that we were seeing just people found this voice interesting. We're seeing those voices rise and we're sort of responding to it. On the right, I wish you could hear this one, but you probably saw this video earlier, probably last week, of a delivery person mocking a bunch of ICE goons and then racing away down the streets of Chicago as they desperately try to stop them. Things like videos like this, it's all happening in Portland as well, of people mocking these forces, an important tool in fighting this moment and puncturing the view of this sort of fascist anti-immigration wave as being somehow something that people want. Wish you could hear it, because this is one of a zillion videos that became very popular of people putting yakety sacks over this video, making it even funnier. 4, and again, I said I would come back to this a zillion times, ongoing support. Progressives must provide both short-term launch financial support and ongoing support for talent and paid media. And at the same time, politicians can play the inside game of prioritizing a long game of working the refs at the state level in places just like Milo laid out, antitrust, media fairness legislation. So a few ways to think about this is both grassroots and progressive-minded funders launch progressive fund news outlets and creators with seed money, and then provide ongoing paid media and financial support. Again, ongoing, very important. At the same time, we rip a page out of the book of ALEC or Chamber of Commerce, putting together model media legislation in blue states where we have a trifecta. We have a chance to actually launch on this. Yes, will it get challenged in court? And do we have any illusions that our Supreme Court will try and fight them? No, but that doesn't mean we can't start that conversation now. And then even in red states, we can start putting these things on the books. Have them launch, that when the time comes, we have some sort of model for how we want this to work. Lastly, hopefully I'm under time. Just a couple things. I just want to throw out there optimism. There is some reason for optimism, and is another thing that we are constantly hitting in our media diet at Courier, is showing people taking action and showing people wins and making people understand that this is a moment, this is not inevitable. Couple articles that I've turned to in recent days. I will share these links on the left. There's a great newsletter from a fantasy football writer, of all things, who also runs a media column called Bad Faith Times. His latest issue was just called "Cultural Shifts Always Feel Permanent. For better or worse, they are not." This was inspired by him watching football all day and having to watch fascist ads during NFL games, and seeing the turn that advertisers felt the country was in. And it's a great piece running down how cultural moments always feel like they are everything until they are not. This is not inevitable. This is not forever. On the right is from maybe others have seen this. Carnegie Endowment for International Peace did a long study recently about democratic recovery after significant backsliding, looking at recent examples in places like Brazil and other countries of complete democratic backsliding and then democratic recovery. The reason there's optimism here is that the good news is that in the past 30 years, there have been many, many examples of countries in our situation that have clawed their way back, in part through the power of the media, and in looking through the history of authoritarianism, almost all the examples of a reversion to democracy have come in recent times. So those are a little. I'll end on that little bit of optimism.
Sounds great. And thanks so much, Kevin. Really appreciate that. I wish we could have heard the videos, but for another time. Thanks so much. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Mackenzie Warren. It is the interim executive director of the Local News Initiative at Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism. He has 25 years of experience in local journalism, having been a reporter, editor, and digital change agent in newsrooms around the nation. Mr. Warren, please share your insights.
All right, great. Thank you so much. And we've been talking at a very national level here. I'm going to focus in on how a lot of the dynamics our first two speakers have been talking about are playing out in local markets around the United States, and I'll give some particular emphasis to both Virginia, because this is for the party in Virginia, but also I'm going to make some points about Illinois, where Northwestern University is, and where Chicago, from the recent example that Kevin just put up, was from. And also, I think it's important for me to just carve out that I'm here in a nonpartisan posture here. I'm not advocating for or against anything. I'm here to give you the facts as we understand them and as our research has turned up, and you can do with them what you will. So let's see here. I first want to get into the news deserts that Milo referenced, and this map is similar to what Milo just put up. Northwestern University and the Medill School of Journalism run something called the State of Local News Project. It's a 20-year running longitudinal study that looks at county by county across the United States, the presence or absence of local news sources across the United States of America. And from this map, I think you'll see a few patterns. If it's dark purple, it means there are 2 or more local news sources in that county. If it's light purple, there's 1. And if it's yellow, that means there are 0 sources of local news and information in that county. And if you look at this map, you'll see some patterns that start to emerge that look like patterns that you have seen in lots of other contexts. If you look at the pattern of where the yellow is, it basically runs from West Texas up the spine east of the Rocky Mountains all the way through North Dakota. If you look at where the light purple, where there's only 1 source of local news and information, you'll see concentration through Appalachia, through the Bible Belt, and through other places across the plains. Now, this maps pretty directly to other maps you've seen about voting patterns, about population density, and other metrics that are important to both the economics and culture in the United States of America. I think for your purposes also, it's interesting to look at what was formerly the blue wall of Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And I'll come to Pennsylvania and Minnesota here in a second, but you'll see a serious erosion in the presence of local news in those 3 states, Michigan, Ohio, and Wisconsin. And those are 3 states that Democrats have lost ground in over the past elections. And so you see the beginnings of those same erosions that happened in Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin, also playing out in Minnesota, contiguous states of Minnesota and Pennsylvania. And I think that's something for you to pay some attention to. Now, specifically for Virginia, which is a richly endowed state in many ways, has a lot of news deserts, or a lot of what we would call watch counties, places where there's a the conditions exist for a news desert to come into existence. And Virginia is a complicated state with a lot of rural areas and a lot of red pockets, and you see that play out on this map right here. So the collar counties around Washington, D.C., and some of the wealthier places in the state have multiple different local news sources. But as you look through coal country and down in the Shenandoah Valley and down into parts south and east of the Tidewater, you see a growing expanse of news deserts or watch counties in Virginia. In fact, 70% of the counties in the Commonwealth of Virginia have either 0 or 1 source of local news and information, and that accounts for close to 4 million Virginians. Meanwhile, there's a precipitous decline in both the presence of newspapers, not that they're the only source of local news and information, but that's part of our metrics here. We also track public broadcasting, and that's going to be significantly changed, of course, with the defunding of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I beseech you to keep track of local news initiative.northwestern.edu on the 20th of this month, where we will release our latest findings across the country, and you will see already the beginning erosion of public media taking hold, including in Virginia. Now, take a look for a minute, if you will, at another state, and this is a bluer state and one of the wealthier states in the country, Illinois. But you see, like many states, there are pockets of remarkable trends. And so look at both where the confluence of the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys are, and that's where in Illinois the preponderance of the news deserts or watch list counties are. That's no surprise, because those are the most population sparse parts of the state. That's where the state is poorest, and we know that there's a map between economic vitality and the presence of local news. And it maps to many other things from a political standpoint that you will see. But look now at the next chart. This was put together by one of our students at the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern, and she set out to see where would the impact of the One Big Beautiful Bill legislation in terms of healthcare have its most profound effect. So in this map, the darker the purple, the more reliance by percentage each county has on the higher percentage of its citizens rely on state-provided medical assistance like Medicaid or food assistance like SNAP. And so of the 9 rural counties, of the 9 rural hospitals in the state, look at the relationship between that and where the absence or presence of a local news source is. It's virtually overlapping. And so 6 of those 9 rural hospitals in the state now are on the verge of failure as a result of the One Big Beautiful Bill legislation, and that maps directly to the presence or absence of local news. So we can start to see that this is not just a question of democratic norms, but also a question of prosperity, a question of health and wellness. And so again, not for me to decide what to do with that from a policy perspective, but for your analytical purposes, you can take a look at that. Now, nationwide, we're in the grip of this crisis, and it's a slow running crisis. 200 counties in there are about 3,000 counties in our country. 200 of them have no source of local news at all, and that number will grow with our latest report that comes out on the 20th of this month. 1,500 counties have only one source. Now, that's more than half of the counties in the United States, and that accounts for about 50 million of our citizens. If you stacked up the list of the 50 states in order of population, the bottom 25 would account for 50 million citizens. So think about basically half of the states in the country having only one source of local news at their disposal, and ask yourself what that might do. Ask yourself, too, how that might map to other characteristics that we have in our country. On the right, and these numbers will be hard to read, but Sandra, you can pass this document out to everybody afterwards. On the right, you'll see median household income in the United States is around about $75,000. Roughly 38% of American households have a bachelor's degree or higher. On average, they're aged about 39 years, and they in these households are run at about 11.5%. Of those households are below the poverty line. Now look at those numbers in comparison to news deserts and watch list counties, and you'll see that there's both a chicken and an egg effect here. And so when you have counties in America that have less education, are older, have greater presence above the poverty line, and have less income, they are more likely to become news deserts. And like in the example that I showed about the healthcare and food assistance, possibly the same effect is happening in reverse. Now, good news. There are new news organizations popping up all the time. And this is our from our report from last year. This number 258 brand new local startups will be a larger number. Well, it's a larger number right now, but you'll be able to read about that larger number on the 20th. And there are some interesting experiments going on all over the United States of America, including in Virginia. Charlottesville tomorrow is a fascinating experiment. And when you see our new report coming out on the 20th, you'll be able to read about the Henrico Citizen, which is another fascinating example. We now have about 1,600 digital-only local news sites across the United States. And though this isn't replacing exactly the loss of, quote, newspapers, it is filling in the map where absences and openings are coming. And I think it's interesting to see here the preponderance of where some of these digital sites and digital-only news sites are going. And it is not necessarily following the same traditional red and blue map that you're used to John King reading to you every election night. Look at the concentration, for example, in Mississippi, in Alabama, in Iowa, in Oklahoma. Fascinating moves happening in places that aren't your traditional blue places or rich places or population dense places. So something's afoot there that's worth looking at. Now, with my remaining time, I want to take a look at the Chicago area in particular, because the Chicago area, and this is a study we just published about 2 weeks ago, the Chicago area in its 14 counties, it pretty much is an index of the United States of America. These 14 counties that run from the south of Kenosha County, Wisconsin, down to the 4 what we would call collar counties in Indiana. If you look at these, they basically look like the United States overall in many of the different socioeconomic and racial and other measurements that you would see. So you'd be interested to know what's going on in the Chicago area. Well, for one thing, there's been an explosion of digital focused local news sites. And Liz, I think, is going to talk a little bit about the creator economy. She and I have been doing some work specifically on the creator economy in the Chicago area. But when you look across what's going on in those 14 county areas, more than half of the outlets that are there are about 140 active local news sources in the 14 county Chicago area. More than half of those outlets serve specialized niches beyond local news. So more topically focused. So they may be about the fine arts, they may be about architecture, they may be about commercial real estate, other sort of narrow and deep topics that they can be the world's leading or the community's leading expert at. And more than a quarter of the outlets that we've studied have an explicit ethnic or racial focus. So Chicago in Arabic, there's 2 different Puerto Rican outfits. There are 3 different outfits in Chicago focused on Black entrepreneurship. And so think a little bit too about how what your definition of a news organization and a local news organization is may not necessarily be comprehensive coverage of every topic under the sun in a geographic area, but rather on a topic of interest, whether an identity interest or a professional or economic one. Now, we did a survey. We talked to more than 1,000 people in those 14 counties, and statistically significant sample, and weighted it. We have a margin of error under 5% in this study, and came to some interesting findings, which I would propose to you can be thought about across the United States as a proxy for what's going on in this country. And we're going to come to some of the numbers that the prior 2 speakers cited a little earlier. First, we asked a question about how often respondents consume local or national news, and whether it's multiple times a day, once a day, all the way down to once a month. And the good news is, within the course of a week, almost every American is consuming news and local news. Or I should say, not every American, people in our survey in Chicago, which I am proposing is a proxy for America. In every category except for multiple times a day, and all of the other times, once a day, multiple times, once a week, once a month, local news is of greater interest to these readers than national news. And I'm going to talk here a little bit about why that might be. Let's jump ahead. First of all, when you ask readers in the Chicago area, whether they agree strongly or a little bit, disagree strongly or a little bit, or neither agree nor disagree, they talk about their trust in local news running higher than that of national news. And they also say the relevance of local news is higher to their lives than that of national news. Package that with two other factors that are interesting from those were two positive traits. Think about from a negative standpoint. Do they find themselves avoiding news? And does news create stress that turns them away and makes them want to not read or watch? And in both of these questions, people are more tolerant of and less stressed by local news than they are national news. So, I mean, all you have to do is turn on cable TV and you'll feel the level of stress coming at you, right? And most of the topics that are being written about at the local level are far less partisan, far less angry, far less scary than in the national news. We asked people from a topical standpoint what was most interesting to them and what caused them to come and read local news. And interesting change between 2024 and 2025. This chart flipped almost upside down between 2024 and 2025. So basically the answers that were of greatest interest in 2024 were health and wealth related things, saving money and getting more out of my money, helping me secure my job, helping me keep my family healthy. And remember, this was at the tail end of the pandemic and this was before the election. So here comes 2025. And the issues that are of greatest importance to local news readers have pretty much flipped upside down. So now they're much more about what I think you would call democratic, and that's with a small d, I guess, sort of the function of government, accountability, watchdog, enterprise, related issues, how to become a better citizen, help me stay safe, which I think we saw in some of the videos that Kevin was just rolling there a little bit more. So there is a shift in the mood and the interest topically in what is of greatest interest to people who are reading and say they will read local news. Now, some bad news that I think we have to confront is the willingness to pay for local news. Local news has to, and am I at the
About
one?
a minute more, Mackenzie.
All right, I'll hustle up. Only 15% of those we surveyed said you should have to pay for local news. That's down from 19% the year before, which that's a 21% difference in just 1 year. So people are decreasing. They need certain topics more. Their trust and stress levels are more comfortable, and yet their willingness to pay is lower. So we have an economic problem there. Lastly, I just want to look here, and I would suggest to you that local media that are going to succeed at matching the interests of the middle third, these are 5 quartiles of political leaning, are going to be on much safer topical ground, not at the edges, not at the most screaming and angst-raising topics. I don't have enough time to explain this chart, but when you get the link from Sandra, you can look in there. Last thing I would say, Sandra, with my remaining 30 seconds, is that there is an opportunity, I think, for Virginia to invest in local news legislation similar to what Illinois has done. And so in Illinois, Governor Pritzker signed this into law just last year, $25 million in tax credits, which helps feed the employment base for local journalism. It helps give tax credits to local businesses that will advertise in real and trustworthy journalism, allows people who are graduating from journalism schools in Illinois to get jobs and have some of their college debt deferred. So these are opportunities from a legislative standpoint that you in Virginia or in other states could consider doing. So thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and I'll hang around for questions at the end.
Thanks so much, Mackenzie. Did we get in all of your suggestions of a legislation we could potentially emulate? Did you get to state them all?
More or less, yeah. I think, you know, I won't name names, but I spoke with one state legislator in Maryland where there's a trifecta, and in fact, a veto-proof trifecta. And that's a more limited approach. They're talking about bringing a bill to allow tax credits for local businesses to invest and buy advertising in locally owned journalism outfits. And the problem is, even in that trifecta state, they can't figure out how to pay for it. So those tax credits, of course, come off of state revenues. And so, you know, I'm worried about whether such a initiative would get through. One thing I do think will happen in Maryland, I think is very likely right now, the legal ads, you have to print the legal ads in a printed newspaper, not just a digital only site. And of course, these digital only sites command a much greater audience than printed newspapers do now. And I think the taxpayers of Maryland are tired of giving Jeff Bezos all the money for the legal ads. So I think that will pass. And I think that will open up the floodgates for more legislation like that for the legal ads to be able to be bought and sold between taxpayers and owners of digital only entities, which in my mind would be a good move.
Thanks so much, Mackenzie. Okay. Now I want to introduce our final panelists. Liz Kelly Nelson is a leader in journalism innovation. She's dedicated to helping independent journalists and media creators build sustainable careers in a rapidly evolving media landscape. With a background in newsroom leadership, digital media strategy, and creator economy expertise, Liz has worked across the journalism ecosystem, supporting reporters, advising media startups, and collaborating with major institutions on the future of independent journalism. As a founder of Project C, a concept she developed during her 2024 Sulzberger Fellowship at Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism, she is focused on empowering journalists to embrace new models, find a sustainable revenue, and create impactful work outside of traditional media structures. Prior to Project C, Liz led teams at Vox, USA Today, Gannett, AOL. She sits on the advisory board for Beehive Media Collective. Ms. Nelson, please share your strategies.
I will. Thank you. And I'm glad to be batting cleanup here this evening. The presentations have been wonderful. I've learned as much as I hope to impart today. I really appreciated all of the presentations from the other presenters today. And you will probably hear some of what you heard from the other speakers echoed in my slides. I am here though to talk about something a little bit different. I'm talking about creator journalism. Kevin touched a little bit on the idea of creators, and really, you know, as Sandra pointed out, like I've spent 25 plus years of my career in traditional media, and my last job was at Vox.com, where I started seeing some of our top talent leaving to launch their own channels on YouTube, to launch Substack newsletters, to launch independent podcasts. And you know, really for me, it was a defining moment, because not only did I see that the talent was really finding a sustainable career on these platforms, they were also becoming a big draw for the audience, especially next generation audiences. I have a son who's 15 years old. He will be voting in the next presidential election. And as Kevin pointed out, this is where a lot of young people are getting their news from. So I left Vox, I left traditional media to be a part of the future and to help make sure that we have a thriving system of creator model journalism, both at the national, at the local level, and now increasingly at the international level, that makes sure that where our youngest next generation consumers are getting their information from has some rigor in it, because I really very much care about the qualities that go into making amazing journalism. I'm not going to go into exactly what Project C is at this point, because Sandra shared a little bit with you about what we do, but suffice to know that there's a big need for us to support the creator journalism ecosystem, because not only is this where younger audiences are going, it's really all audiences. Like, we are just seeing so many shifts, and we've talked about several of those tonight with some of the other panelists. But just to give you a sense, a reason why this is happening, there are many of them, but there are a few different factors that are coming together. One is traditional newsrooms, the jobs are drying up. Since 2020, we've lost thousands and thousands of jobs. In 2020 alone, 16,000 jobs in traditional newsrooms were lost. So many journalists who are making the decision to go independent don't see it as any riskier at this point than staying in a news organization, because the business model is troubled at this point. Trust. There was a Gallup poll that came out just last week. Trust in traditional institutional media has dropped to 28%, the lowest it's ever been. It's the first time it's ever dropped below 30%. And at the same time, adults under 30 are nearly as likely to trust information from social media sites as from national news organizations. And as Kevin pointed out, the younger you go down to Gen Z and now even Gen Alpha, the more pronounced that becomes. At the same time, trust in individuals, in creators and personalities continues to go up, and we'll talk about that in a moment. It's about the kind of connection you make. I did want to pause for a second and just define creator model journalism and what that is. This woman that you're seeing on the screen here is a creator, a TikTok creator named Lisa Remillard. She used to be a local news anchor in Texas who was fired and launched a TikTok channel, and where she had hundreds of thousands of viewers on local TV. She now has millions of followers on TikTok and is one of the top news TikTokers out there. But by definition, a creator model journalist is an individual who combines elements of journalism with content creation techniques. So we're talking about using, short form vertical video, using audio, newsletters, ways to reach audiences that are very much a part of the creator economy. And I would like to make sure that we are understanding that there's a difference between a news influencer and a creator model journalist. I work with journalists at Project C and people who want to work journalistically, and they do exist out there. So there is a difference between a Joe Rogan, say, or even I have like a cousin who's like a big TikToker who likes to talk about the political stories that she finds out there in the mainstream media and weighs in on them. That is content that's out there and it is influencing, but we really need to make sure that as we are supporting the news ecosystem, not only are we making sure that strong local newsrooms are continuing to get support and funding, but that creators who are actually doing journalistic work are getting funding as well, right? Because they are where the audiences are increasingly turning. So what makes somebody a creator model journalist? They're producing journalistic work, either original reporting, opinion, or aggregation. They are usually covering a niche topic, not general news. Again, I know this was mentioned earlier, most creators are working in a very niche kind of way. Mackenzie mentioned kind of the very narrow areas that we discovered in Chicago around certain populations and communities, and that's true of subject matter too. Nobody is looking to the internet for a general interest publication anymore. The internet is your general interest publication. Your TikTok feed is your general interest publication. So most creators find their success and their most loyal audiences covering a very niche topic. They are perceived as a trusted messenger or a source to a loyal audience. They work independently outside traditional news organizations and leverage the creator economy to build a sustainable career. I'm not going to make you read this entire massive graphic, but this is something that Project C produced earlier this year to put creator model journalism in context across kind of the spectrum of from traditional news sources all the way through to AI. And there is a QR code there. If you want to look at it after, you can. And again, Sandra will be making these slides available for you. But this gives you, again, some more of the characteristics that divide those things. This is from a study that Google did last year, and I was a part of this study and helped advise on it. But just the different kinds of voices that you're finding across social media and social media platforms that span from journalists at established news organizations all the way through to, like my cousin, ordinary people. And, just another way of thinking about who are the people that are out there that are actually informing our, brothers, sisters, cousins, friends, children on the internet. And then finally, with the creator journalists in specifically, there are three kinds that we found that really are the most popular and really make the biggest, impact with audiences. One are investigators. So these are folks who are uncovering new information, right, and doing in-depth original reporting. Second are explainers. Vox, my former home, invented explanatory journalism and an explanatory video. But these are people who are taking something that might seem difficult to understand, a policy or a scientific theory, and making it understandable using explanatory techniques. And then third are commentators, right? They're interpreting and reacting to events and news. They are bringing opinions and perspectives and some of their personal judgment, but these are the kinds of things that you're going to see out there. So, one thing that we talk about a lot in the journalism industry, as we've seen this trust degrade, is news avoidance and why people are turning away from mainstream media. And this guy on the left here with the light bulb flashing above his head is named Ben Reininga. He was a Nieman Berkman Klein Fellow at Harvard last year, and he did a study where he went through every possible piece of research that he could find about news avoidance on the one hand and about the rise of creator model journalism on the other. And he fed all of those studies into a bespoke large language model, a artificial intelligence model, and found that the top reasons that people said that they were turning away from news on the left was that it's elite, too complex, biased, depressing, and irrelevant. And the reason reasons people cite it for actually gravitating towards creators like V Spear here, who's another top news TikToker who has a channel called Under the Desk News, is that they're intimate and informal. They're simple and colloquial. They don't make you feel stupid, right? When they're explaining something to you that you don't understand. They are transparent and engaging. They're not saying we're impartial and then showing you in every other possible way that there's some bias coming through in their reporting. They're playful and less self-serious, even when they're talking about serious topics. And then finally, and I think most importantly, they're diverse and relatable. People want to get news and information about their world from people who they feel they have some affinity with. And there's much more diversity in the news creator space than there is in traditional newsrooms at this point. So just some really quick examples of creator model journalists to give you a sense of the kinds of folks that we're talking about. This is Basan Aouda. Basan is based in Gaza. She's Palestinian, and she has, for the past 2+ years, been reporting from on the ground in Gaza on Instagram. She is Wizard Basan if you want to follow her, and she partnered with AJ Plus in the last couple of years and won not just a Peabody Award, but also a Murrow Award and an Emmy for her work coming out of Gaza. This is Carlos Eduardo Espina, and he was called the one-man Telemundo on TikTok by the New York Times, who did a feature on him. But he's serving a huge Latino audience, first primarily in the Houston area, but now it is expanded out, rippled out nationally because he's reaching a diaspora audience that is really feeling that they're not served by mainstream news organizations. This is Brian Vance. Brian is a guy who lives in Portland, Oregon, who decided that he really cared a lot about grocery prices, right? We talk about a niche. So he launched a newsletter that is about groceries in Portland. And it's not just a coupon clipping, it's really an elevated look at why things cost what they cost. And he does really great investigative work actually about the food and beverage scene in Portland and has found a wonderful audience there. This is Marissa Cabas. Marissa has a newsletter called The Handbasket. She reports by herself from her apartment in Brooklyn, New York. She broke the federal funding freeze story in January before any national news organization. And she's doing that without any support, without an editor, without liability insurance, without a lot of the protections that traditional news organizations have, but has become a go-to journalist for a lot of people who are still working within the federal government who want to whistleblow on the Trump administration. And then finally, Dave Jorgensen. Dave Jorgensen was the Washington Post TikTok guy until about 2 months ago when he left and launched his own TikTok channel, YouTube channel, and newsletter. And his approach to the news is really very Washington centric. What is happening in DC? What is happening with the government? But again, in that, graphic we looked at earlier about like why people gravitate to creator model journalists, he does it with humor. He does it with making us kind of like laugh a little bit at things, even when if we don't laugh, we'd cry. And so he's like just great. I'm not going to play the video because who knows if we can hear it. Okay, so finally, what can we do to support independent creator journalism? So a few things that I think folks who are on this call can think about, no matter where you kind of sit in the power structures or in your communities. Fund these storytellers directly. Most of them are for profit. If they have newsletters, they would love for you to pay for a subscription. If they are on YouTube and other platforms, they often will have a Patreon link where you can actually pay them. Share their work, right? Like make sure that if you are sharing content with your networks, whether friends or family, that you're not just sharing the Roanoke Times or the Washington Post, like make sure that you're finding the creators in your community and sharing their work as well, because trust me, they are there. Make sure that they get the same access as traditional media. So if you're in a position where you control who gets into a press briefing or who's on a distro list for, a press release, that you're sending it to the creators as well. Collaborate with them, right? Are there ways that you can collaborate with them on explainer videos that we just talked about, or issue explainers? They would love to most likely partner with you. Provide space, training, support, or small stipends for them to build sustainable operations. Invest in the ecosystem. That's something that I talk about a lot with funders and with folks like Mackenzie at universities, is like, how can we actually make sure that we are supporting the next generation of journalists, even if they never set foot in a traditional newsroom? We need to make sure we're building the infrastructure and the support that they can be reporting independently. And then finally, this is what I should have had last, model transparency and respect. We really value the independence of journalists and the independence of creator journalists is just as important. If you are funding these people, make sure that the funding that you are giving them is transparent. Don't put any shackles on them to say that they can't share who is funding their work, because it is very important for us to make sure that we are not promoting, whether on the right or the left, any dark money coming into the system, because there is a lot of dark money that's coming into the media ecosystem from all sides of the political spectrum right now. And that is not a best practice from the point of view of the journalism industry. We want to make sure that we're doing this in a way that is ethical and correct. Okay, so really quickly, I'm going to skip that. I did do a quick scan of Virginia to see if I could find some creator model journalists for you. And Sandra, I promise I'll wrap this up in under a minute.
Oh, keep going.
Great. So a few that I found, but I'm sure that you all out there who are watching along may know more. And if you do, please share those with us. Brandon Jarvis, who writes Virginia political newsletter, or AKA Virginia Scope, has 15,000 followers and is on Substack and is reporting regularly on Virginia politics. Josh Stanfield, Virginia Politics Revealed, also on Substack, has a pretty great following and seems to be doing pretty regular coverage of what's coming out of the State House for you. So take a look at what Josh is doing. Black Virginia News, as Mackenzie pointed out, many of our independent journalists, and I don't know why my graphic isn't showing, but I had a screen grab of Black Virginia News, but many independent journalism outlets and creators are serving specific communities who are feeling underrepresented by mainstream media. Black Virginia News is an example of that. 29,000 followers on Substack, and they also have a podcast which has an equally robust following. So are there ways that you can reach different communities with your messaging by making sure that you're reaching out to these outlets that serve specific communities? The answer is yes. All right, so how do you find more of these creators in your community? Because even though we know that journalism as a model is under threat, and as Mackenzie showed, like news deserts are a very real challenge, there are many people who are stepping into the breach in these communities where traditional newsrooms are blinking out to cover their communities, and you can find them. I have every place that I've looked, I turned over rocks and found creator model journalists covering their community at the local level. So ask your friends, ask your neighbors, and ask your constituents who they're following on social media. Use ChatGPT or another AI search with a prompt like, who is covering politics in Virginia, or what is the top news source for Latinos in Virginia? And then finally, review the Virginia Local News Ecosystem Study, which was done recently, and similarly to the work that Mackenzie and his team are doing in Chicago and in Illinois, they're tracking the news sources that are available to you in Virginia. All right, so that is it from me. I thank you all. It's been wonderful talking to you today.
Thanks so much, Liz. Well, this has been a fairly unique opportunity to hear our expert panelists share their insights, and we're looking forward now to eliciting additional information through the Q&A. So let's move to part two. I've asked my national affairs colleagues, Russell Brooks and Michelle Menapace, to monitor the Q&A box throughout the program, sorting through and selecting some of your questions to ask the speakers. They will also ask some questions prepared by the committee and there clearly isn't going to be time to ask every question. They will try to identify those that are on topic, not duplicates, and that may address aspects of our issue not yet considered. Russell and Michelle, turn your cameras on. I may break in from time to time, and I'll certainly let you know when to ask the last question in your segment and when to conclude. Russell will conduct the first and Michelle the second half of the Q&A. Please begin the Q&A, Russell.
Well, thank you very much, Sandra. I think this question is probably best directed as a follow-up to what Liz was talking about, and Kevin and Mackenzie may want to contribute as well. So the question is, beyond launching news outlets or mere messaging, should we prioritize advocating, funding, and building a user-friendly, censorship-resistant, decentralized, privacy-first overlay for the internet, an infrastructure layer with no single point of failure, so that any media ecosystem we build can't be blocked, surveilled, or captured by governments or dominant corporate platforms? I know that's a lot. Hopefully you heard it all.
Well, that sounds wonderful. A little bit out of my purview, right? Like not what I have control over. What I will say is that we need to use the tools that we have. And right now we need to actually concentrate on the reality that we're living in. And yes, definitely building for the future. And what we see, you know, as you heard from several of the speakers tonight, is a distributed information ecosystem where people are decreasingly going to the central places we used to, right? The local newspaper, local TV news, the national nightly news broadcast, even large national digital operations. They are increasingly getting their news in this distributed way. And in fact, I would go even further and say they're not just getting their news, they're not getting their news in a way that feels like the behaviors that we would even have recognized 10 to 15 years ago. Most people, most younger audiences especially, are getting their news in what's called time pass mode, right? They are on a social platform, whether it's TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, what have you, and news is one part of what they are seeing go by in their feed. It's viral dance, news, recipe, my niece's wedding, influencer content from this last weekend. So what I am working towards with Project C, and I know Mackenzie and Kevin and Milo are working towards in various ways, is making sure that there's rigorous, ethical, fair content that's flowing into those systems. I'm more increasingly worried about AI and the amount, like the fire hose of content that is flooding into the system as well, and how we make sure that like real fact-based content shows up in those contexts.
Yeah, I'd throw in.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Real quick, I would just throw in. I love the universe where that exists, what Russell just described, and wish I was there. I will say this, that I think people sometimes have a over estimation of the nefarious power of a lot of these algorithms and the child men who run them. A great example is what happened after the election, and we have seen on the progressive side of the news fence in a place like Facebook. After the election, Zuckerberg very clearly sort of decided to bend the knee and remove all restrictions on misinformation and disinformation and political content on Facebook and all meta platforms. The intention of doing that was to allow MAGA back in, to allow those voices to flow, to allow disinformation to take hold. The unintended consequences of that is that the platform he created, it still thrives on engagement, anger, and conflict. What he underestimated was a lot of those things are actually coming from the progressive and left side of the fence right now. We have seen, and we've anecdotally have heard from many other organizations similar to ours, one of the biggest growth engines across our sort of distributed media platforms has been on Meta platforms and Facebook, which was not intended by them and was not anticipated by us. So I think we shouldn't sort of imbue them with more power and control than they always have.
And if I could add just quickly, while it's beyond my purview from the technological and policy standpoint, I'll answer this from a First Amendment standpoint, and that is that the best antidote to bad speech is more speech. And so this utopia that we heard described could be harnessed in the hands of somebody who you don't like for really bad purposes. Be careful what you wish for. The countries on the globe that wield the greatest lockdown control over the internet are the most autocratic countries. And so while one may dream of a space that's free and clean and there are daisies and sunshine, it could very badly turn against your own interests very quickly, depending on who's in charge.
Okay. I'll move on to another question. And I think Liz described this to a certain degree. Americans of different generations and classes are receiving their news from very different platforms. Gen Z and millennials receive their news from TikTok, social media, and YouTube, while many older people rely more on mainstream media and talk radio platforms. Young, more educated, and more well-off people often seek unfiltered footage from multiple sources, domestic and international, while evidence suggests that older, less educated, and less well-off individuals receive more limited domestic version of events. This information divide may explain why these different groups have such different views on many issues. How can this divide be corrected and overcome in a more diverse and progressive media ecosystem? And Milo, do you want to get into the conversation?
That's a wonderful question. I think one of the things that people that are working on solutions to this, there's another piece of the puzzle that is still, I think, and I'm curious what my colleagues this evening also think, is consumer desire. We're all here creating sources of good information, better resources, problem solving, the production of quality information for folks. There's a flip side of this is the consumer demand and interest. I think there was a study not long ago where a local community provided opportunity for, I think, a free subscription to local newspaper, and nobody really came. It was not as well received as we here working so hard to create better information and better information systems. So I think there is a role for education, and specifically thinking of media literacy as a requirement, especially as we navigate this world. So thinking of some schools, and like most things, education. Finland, for example, definitely teaches media literacy starting in like 6th grade. But thinking of this as a long-term strategy of better equip American minds for the information landscape that they're heading into. Not that should be, ignored until the 6th graders reach age to be making voting decisions. But in all seriousness, there has to be an effort for media literacy. I think that's part of the solution. Curious what my colleagues think about this.
Liz or Mackenzie?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Milo, on media literacy. That's a really important part of the equation, like in making sure that, no matter your age, no matter your generation, that like you have some way of discerning what is fact-based information from opinion. And I think that we actually may have an easier job of building that into schools, right? And into young people than we can with like generations that have already kind of gone past that age, right? The misinformation, disinformation is not a phenomenon of the internet age, right? Like we can look at the cable news networks and see very distinct different worlds that people who watch each cable news network live in and get different sets of information. And those are the demographics that are watching, the age demographics that are watching cable news tend to skew older, right? So what do we do? How do we reach back and make sure that there's some news literacy going into the people who like their primary source of news is cable news? I don't think that I have the answer to that. When it comes to the younger generations, part of the work that I do and a lot of other people are doing with the creator ecosystem is trying to educate, right? I work with a group called Trusting News, and every journalist that goes through and every news creator that goes through Project C courses, we make sure that we give them a good grounding in news ethics and transparency, regardless of the fact whether they come from a news background or not, because we believe that a way to approach this is to make sure that the creators we're working with are actually modeling that behavior, so that when my 15-year-old son sees good work, sees rigorous journalism and what that looks like, he will then know what the opposite looks like too, and be able to make that decision for himself.
One of the best ways to address media literacy is to do so at the secondary school level. This is where a lot of our literacy outcomes are determined for the rest of our lives. And so one opportunity, Northwestern University has worked with the College Board to create a seminar for a class that hasn't existed before called AP Journalism. And in that, the core of the curriculum is about media literacy. We're prototyping that in the Chicago Public Schools right now, and this is going to be on offer in the next academic year across the country. So Virginians could think about adopting that and pushing the AP journalism as an option in the school districts across the Commonwealth.
Yeah, I'd throw one other thought that I've been thinking of, just to flip it the other way. I think there's also a need for platform literacy on the side of creators and news providers. And I think you pointed out a few people, Liz, that are sort of on the forefront here, like Dave Jorgensen, who I met recently. His impetus for starting that channel, which is essentially a vertical video short form comedy channel, let's just say, was to combat misinformation and disinformation in young men. That is explicitly that's the reason he chose his format. That's a really good understanding of the formats in which they're receiving information, the kind of tone that it requires, and what platforms to be on. Another interesting example is, I don't know if everybody listens to or has heard of a podcaster called Pablo Torre. He has a podcast called Pablo Torre Finds Out, and he does great breaking investigative journalism. He's broken big stories in the world of sports over the last month. The way he delivers it, the style of it is extremely online, extremely understanding of what will work in the podcast space and hold people's attention. And he's very explicit in knowing that he needs to understand the tools. Understand the tools of the enemy to use against them if we're trying to get out of the truth, and instead of trying to change or re-educate people, understand how they're receiving information and change how you deliver it. So that's another solution.
If I could chime in and make a selfless plug for the Media and Democracy Project. Frankly, the genesis of what our group is to find people who recognize there's a problem in American democracy and recognize they need to engage in activism for these solutions that we're talking about. So the idea, and one of the suggestions I had today for all civic org and civic-minded individuals is to build out a budget of time that is engaged specifically with solutions in media reform. So we specifically share with ideas monthly of what is the information war report. We help people develop the muscles of how you understand why what's happening to CBS News is not going to be good for the the information space. And one kind of special thing that we emphasize is a really good place to start, and I mentioned it to one of the questions that were in the Q&A, is media ownership is a really helpful strategy to help people understand an agenda. So we help people and we advise people to generally refer to news organizations by their corporate ownership. So for example, it's Jeff Bezos's Washington Post, Rupert Murdoch's Wall Street Journal, and Fox, and that can help people. So that media literacy we do and not in schools, but we make it as part of and we think anybody interested in democracy should be building out some infrastructure for media reform and media literacy as part of the solutions as going forward.
Thank you for that. There's also an infrastructure related question from Greg Brandon. He's in our audience, and he asks on behalf of rural Americans, how much does expanded access to media depend on rural broadband? And if people like to access media from their smartphones, are they dependent on 5G networks? Who would like to take that one on?
And the answer is yes. Full stop.
Okay. Anyone like to add anything?
Just a little bit specifically, this is getting back to people interested in democracy really thinking about the FCC and developing larger orders thoughts. The FCC regulates broadband. There were $42 billion budgeted by the last administration to install broadband to remote areas of the country that need it. There was big momentum after the pandemic, recognizing the concept of kids staying on school buses where there was Wi-Fi so they could do their homework in rural America was grotesque, a nonpartisan issue. There has been a lot of money specifically already delegated for that. And right now there's a battle between oligarchs, actually, how that money is to be spent. The current FCC chairman, the same one who strong-armed the local TV station conglomerate Sinclair and Nexstar to threaten them, to which ultimately led to them temporarily suspending Jimmy Kimmel. That same FCC chairman actually is in charge of right now whether to distribute, and is basically controlling whether that money is actually going to be distributed as designed through broadband or the other purview of the FCC, which is satellite. And those folks paying attention, who is the dominant influence on satellite communications in the world right now? It is Elon Musk. And there is clearly a conflict of interest given the alliance of the MAGA administration and Elon Musk. So just to share with you that the answer is yes, but there are also another opportunity to keep plugging that we need to think about the larger regulatory structures and get them back into alignment for the common good, as opposed to oligarchs against the common good interest.
And let's also add to it that the broadband pipes don't know what information is coming across themselves. So more broadband doesn't mean more trustworthy information. It simply means faster downloads. And so, it could actually exacerbate some of the problems that we've been talking about as well.
True. I refer back to the founders who recognized that it was essential for the colonies to have a subsidized delivery system of the U.S. Postal Service enshrined in the Constitution to make sure delivery of information, back to that Jefferson quote, I'd rather have newspapers than a government than the government or democracy. I know I'm butchering the quote, but that flow of information and the way you referred to it specifically, Mackenzie, that drown out disinformation with good information, at least get the pipes there.
One last question, Russell. Quick one.
Okay. To make it quick, maybe it is a follow-up to this question about infrastructure. Are there technologies already on the horizon that should be explored to create this more modern information infrastructure that the progressive forces may be able to take advantage of?
I would just throw in here, I think one thing I'm thinking about is going back to something a bunch of us said, that there's a place to play at the state level, at the local level, in some non-obvious legislative efforts. And again, this is something that places like ALEC and Chamber of Commerce do all the time, where there are different kinds of regulatory fixes that can happen outside the heat of the federal budget that can sort of nudge some of these or affect some of these changes. I think we get caught up in trying to find that sort of one big trick that's going to fix it all, when the answer may be a lot of smaller efforts in places with trifectas or blue states that can experiment with things and find, hey, maybe there's a way to like nudge something on a regulatory battlefield that is outside the the eye of Sauron of a Chairman Carr who would get in the way, but that could have an effect rather than trying to find the one big thing that's going to solve it all at a national level.
Well, thank you very much, Russell. Let's move over to Michelle to continue the questioning.
Thanks, Sandra. There is a question here from Dean Baker, who's asking what folks think about Section 230. Dean is an economist with the Center for Economic Policy Research, and he's written about this topic, where he's advocating a requirement that platforms respond to takedown notices to protect against liability for defamation. We could exempt sites that rely on subscriptions or donations rather than ads, or selling personal information to try and tilt the playing field against those giant platforms. Can you all speak to that?
I'll just jump in real quick with the irony of that. And obviously, I've read Dean Baker and your amazing work. The irony of it is that this is a complete inversion of where we all were on Section 230, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, 5 years ago, where the idea was the opposite, where it was the right that was trying to label social platforms, give them the liability for the content on those platforms. Now we've come all the way around to saying, okay, now that a lot of those platforms have been taken over by misinformation and disinformation, and you have owners who are very explicitly, without any pretense, putting their thumbs on the scales, now we've sort of switched sides. I think it's where previously, I think what's happened in some ways by how quickly sort of the media overlords, as you put it, Milo, have kind of bent the knee or sort of revealed sort of their preferences, their policy preferences, their government preferences. By how quickly and sort of nakedly and openly that's happened, it's allowed these conversations to just proceed much more quickly. And there is no pretense. There is no, like, you can't put out a tagline that's claims to be fair and balanced anymore when you are so publicly and explicitly choosing sides. And so in that environment, I think it's just harder and harder to deny that these platforms should be responsible for the content that's on them. I think this one platform that we haven't talked about here, that this is rearing its head a lot, and we're dealing with it because we're on this platform, is Substack, which has had a large, let's just call it a bit of a Nazi problem, let's say, with a lot of far right and Nazi adjacent, if not full on Nazi newsletters on their platform. They claim that they are exempt, that they are not supporting this, but then they also have rev share agreements and sometimes actually do financial support with some of these groups, which makes it hard to claim that. It gets harder and harder to disagree with that point.
Anyone else want to jump in before I move to the next question? Okay, I saw that Milo responded in the Q&A to a question from Sarah Albamonte, who asked about a law like the Fairness Doctrine that might be needed to rein in media companies from extreme conflict. And that kind of dovetails with a question that our committee was looking at in, can we look to the EU for model legislation on regulating mis and disinformation? And how do we go about getting that back into play?
I'd like to quote Mackenzie. Mackenzie really had the great quote, I think, specifically. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Mackenzie. You said it perfectly. Would you mind just restating it? Because I'm going to...
Are you referring to when I said the best solution to bad speech is more speech?
Correct. Yes. I think ensuring bad speech. Thank you. I'm going to make that your tagline. Thank you. I think that's excellent. That said, there is a model. The European model right now is attempting to implement standards across the board, digital privacy, and holding people accountable. I mean, we saw we can as a country, all right, so let me strike that. We saw previously some of these companies can do important vetting and moderation of content. And so how do we force that? I think I don't know the answer right now. We've seen that Silicon Valley right now is aligning itself with the administration for multiple reasons. But I do think I come back to one of the few shining media lights for me, or highlights for me in the last several years, was the response to Disney, that people do have the power of the purse, and people quitting and canceling subscriptions to Disney showed immense power. And that's why we really emphasize media ownership as a big key to understanding agendas. And there are some platforms. I want to go back slightly to the question that Russell asked, which is there are some technological solutions that are developing that are creating infrastructure that is less impacted by right-wing oligarchs and propaganda. I think Blue Sky is a potential example. The concept of federating media platforms. Blue Sky is one of several. Mastodon is another. And there are people working on how does one federate or distribute networks of information that are impervious to control by an oligarch or a company, for example. So I know, just as an aside, Maria Ressa, the Nobel laureate from the Philippines, has a news organization in an authoritarian, under an authoritarian regime, and they have created their own infrastructure for their news organization that is authoritarianism resistant. So there are some technologies being developed that do make news and information function and are protected outside of some of these the conduits right now of media ownership. That was kind of a blurred answer, but I just wanted to dovetail these two things of there will be some technological solutions, and some of them are beginning to be here.
Thanks, Milo. And I have a two-part question. I think starting with Liz, to talk about how crucial on-air personalities might be to the success of an information venture, no matter their intent. But then Jim Gillespie also asked a question that I think would be appropriate for you to talk about in how we assess the ethics of these particularly the creator journalists. Do we just learn on our own? And if you could talk about that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. So the personality question, if what you're asking is what I'm answering, let me know if it's not. But yes, like the personality connection, it really is important in terms of like breaking through and making sure that your message is being heard by especially these next generation audiences. They just value information that is coming from an individual more than they do from a brand at this point. So making sure that you, if you are an independent creator journalist, have a strong personal brand is important. It's something we also are talking about with a lot of newsrooms. It's how do you elevate your internal talent as well to help them build their brands and make connections on behalf of your brand. A great example of that would have been Dave Jorgensen up until a couple of months ago when he left the Washington Post, where there were probably many people who their experience of the Washington Post was Dave Jorgensen. To kind of stay there for a moment, and Kevin did point out, like, the intention that Dave launched Local News International with, which is to reach young men. The other thing, and I saw Dave recently, and that we spoke about was, he grew up in an era where he got most of his news from The Daily Show and from Stephen Colbert on the Colbert Report. And I think it's really important that we remember that we can activate minds in that way with humor and intelligence and making something a little bit funny and a little bit clever. And that's what he's proving every day in the work that he does now on TikTok and Instagram. But again, it is another way that we can see personality and a little bit more spirit kind of helping people to make an emotional connection with the news. And then your second question, I'm sorry, can you repeat the second question for me, Michelle?
It was about ethics.
Yes, thank you. I got it. Yeah, so the ethics question, and I skipped over the slide in my presentation, but Project C recently developed an ethics framework for creator model journalism in collaboration with Trusting News that we're rolling out later this month, where we define kind of a set of qualities that you would look for in what we would say is kind of in the green light category for a creator model journalist. You're looking for things like, are they citing their sources? Are they posting corrections when something is wrong? Are they engaging in their comments? That's a really important one out in the creator ecosystem, is showing that they're willing to engage with their audience and answer questions when people are coming back and asking about their reporting. And most importantly, that they are transparent about where their funding is coming from and how they are able to do the work that they do. When you get over into kind of the yellow and red categories, obviously things shift a little bit, right? In the yellow category, you're seeing a little bit less transparency. Maybe people aren't sharing where they're getting their work from, or they're not citing primary sources. And then when you get into the red category, obviously these are people who are actively peddling disinformation, misinformation, or hate speech in the ways that we've talked about tonight. We are sharing that with multiple different end users, right? One right now, the first use case that we are sharing it with is actually journalism funding organizations, right? To say, this is how you can actually figure out who in the creator space you should fund. But we are also sharing it with consumers. We are sharing it with the tech platforms, because the tech platforms, there are some good people working there still, like despite, whoever their owners may be, who do care about journalism. Actually, there are a lot of former journalists who work on the news and journalism teams at the tech platforms. And there is an ability for the tech platforms to put their thumbs on the scales for creators who are doing ethical work. And so we want to make sure that they have the tools to know what to look for so that they can do that. And we are having some very productive conversations with them.
Thank you. I see also a question from Sue Wilson with the Media Action Center, and I'm not sure that you can address her final question, but I'd love to hear some ideas on how to respond to get people engaged. She says there's an urgent need for local residents to stand up for local broadcasting. The broadcast airways are unique in that the people legally own them, and we have legal rights in this arena that we don't have elsewhere. She asks if there's interest within the Democratic Party to engage in this effort, but I guess putting it to all of you would be, how do we compel that kind of engagement as individuals? Is it with a party? Is it with activism? Is it through some of the work that all of you are doing? And I open it up to the floor for you.
Here, I'll take a quick crack at this. I want to put something up on the screen. And my basic hypothesis is care less about TV than you used to. So creators, as Liz has been talking about for a while now here, if you look at this data, you see that between creators on social media and family and friends and online groups or communities, these are leading sources way above newspapers, just behind TV stations for where people are getting local news. But if you look by age, this is where there's a steep difference. So if you're 60 plus, you're 70% likely to get your local news from TV. If you are 18 plus, that number goes way down to 27%. And so if you look at by age, TV is less and less and less relevant for you're using television as your source for local news, and content creators or trusted sources like friends and family and online community groups go up and up as the age gets younger. So if you're interested in cultivating younger voters, your target is not going to be on doing anything in the TV space. That would be my sort of, I'm not a political scientist, but those numbers seem kind of like useful to me.
I agree that the writing's on the wall in terms of the demographics of who currently there probably is to some extent also a relationship between voter turnout. So those demographics who are still watching the news are still major voters. The bulk of advertising dollars, or a huge chunk of advertising dollars for campaigns, is still, despite its lack of utility, frankly, is still going towards those TV ads. TV news is also changing. They're developing online platforms, and so I think that though they will still be streamed through a television, they are engaging communities and online as well. So I think we're just going to see a transition. There will always be the need for local video news, and that's the other thing we're seeing. Also, as we could do another session. Is print going to be dead in 20 years? And so I think the local stations will still continue to be important. For the current older voting population, but also the local TV stations are changing. But we're also seeing them as a bottleneck to content writ large, the Sinclair Next Star as well. So I think Sue's point is also not only in terms of news, but these are becoming vertically very large scale throttles to information. We saw Nexstar and Sinclair, and with the current deregulation that the car FCC is about to turbocharge the size. So Super Sinclair, Super Nexstar are in the works. And so those entities, I do believe we do need to engage as communities, as civic orgs, and people interested in democracy writ large, to still fight back against further consolidation of those stations. So break up big media, break up big tech, I think are still parallel.
Thank you all.
One more question, Michelle.
Roger. So I'll start with directing this at Kevin, but then anybody can jump in. What would success look like in a world where there was a functioning progressive media counterbalance to the conservative media ecosystem?
Oh, it would be all flowers and land of chocolate. I think what it looks like is that there is a fair shake on points of view and information, and there is a reasonable expectation of shared facts and shared knowledge in a lot of these spaces. I don't think, again, I'm not a believer in that there's sort of one big regulation we can do to bring about this marvelous future, but I do think it means that in the space through some combination of local and state level regulation and movements and more effective communicators on the sort of progressive side and out of the fact-based news, and better funding for sort of effective journalism, creators who like we're cobbling together this sort of patchwork of voices speaking for the fact-based side of the fence. It just means that wherever you turn, there will be a sort of a powerful voice there that is speaking for this, and that there wouldn't be a place like no longer would there be a place like a Twitter, Sinclair, a Nexstar, where it is allowed for, or that there are places where those voices are completely or almost entirely shut out, and that's an ecosystem that everybody can exist in. That doesn't mean it's like to your point, Mackenzie, like there's not some we don't want some all-encompassing protocol that can be taken over by any kind of actor or bad actors. Just means that the playing field allows for the fact that you know, there'll be an equal point of view in all of these places, and we have effective communicators who can really take advantage of that in all those places.
Anybody else?
I would chime in that I just see two separate things. We're focused primarily on advocating for straight news, fact-based news, reality-based news. That's really what we think. There is a separate issue, which is very important, is to create partisan news and feed that ecosystem. And so I think it's important, though, that there be a fact-based, reality-based news. For example, I personally find the Associated Press to be that example. When people ask me, well, what's your media diet? And I think there is a fact-based news organization out there that does incredible work, that does not have an agenda, is a nonprofit, is not owned by billionaires, and it is the Associated Press. So I think that's one thing I'd like to highlight. And then, yes, it is essential to build and feed the demand of people on the left to have their own media ecosystem with credible journalists, that it's wonderful to hear systems of thinking about how does one rate them and make sure they're getting quality information and producing incredible content like Courier. But we also want to make sure that we're producing or we're advocating for, as pro-democracy information warriors, for nonpartisan, straight news that really gives people what they need without any hint of a partisan angle.
Yeah, I just want to throw one more thing in. Something you said, Liz, is that I think some of these like creators that we're talking about, the best of them, like a Marissa Kabas or a Pablo Torre or even Dave Jorgensen, is that they came up and trained in a traditional ethical newsroom environment. They learned the rules of journalism and are applying those in interesting new ways. But the ethics and the approach that they're taking is everything you're describing. And the concern that I have is the next generation coming up. There's less of those newsrooms. There's less of that ability to educate on how to properly do FOIA requests and do retractions and have a real ombudsman approach. Like, how do we keep that train going so that there are people who don't necessarily just learn the creator approach or how to create a brand or a voice, but also learn the ethics of journalism and investigative journalism.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I'll co-sign on that, Kevin. And, that's where, journalism schools, places like Medill and others really need to start building creator model journalism into the curriculum so that these young people who want to be journalists see that they can go and learn both the craft and kind of the art, right, at the same time. Because a lot of journalism students I've talked to are really worried about like what their future is, because they are also seeing layoff after layoff in, TV news and digital news and traditional newspapers. And so they're wondering what their future is. I think that we can do them a great service by building creator model training and entrepreneurialism into J-School programs, but teach that side by side with the FOIA requests and with the ethical journalism and with the gumshoe reporting, all of the things that like we learn that are really important.
Okay. Whew, this was so good. I think we're closing Q&A and we need to wrap up. So I wanted to, first of all, thank Michelle and Russell for the Q&A. And on behalf of the FCDC National Affairs Committee and our Virginia Democratic Committee co-sponsors, I want to thank all of our distinguished panelists for recognizing the importance of this crisis and for sharing their expertise, analyses, and strategies to help us win the information war. I also want to thank our audience for your interest and attention and your activism and for staying with us the full 2 hours. Wow. In closing, let's be clear-eyed about the stakes and the adversaries in this fight. The information war we are waging is a battle for the soul of our democracy against a deeply entrenched right-wing infrastructure that has spent decades consolidating its power. Today, with initiatives like Project 2025 aiming to stifle free speech and Trump administration-aligned billionaire-funded networks fueling disinformation and creeping fascism, we need to respond with urgency and resolve. To win this war, we need a unified strategy that weaves together infrastructure, ecosystem, and capacity. We must build robust, progressive media systems that can withstand market forces and thrive. This means integrating sustainable funding strategies, public, private, and hybrid business plans that ensure that these new media infrastructures are not at the mercy of right-wing billionaires or the whims of the market. We must also cultivate a media ecosystem that reaches into every cultural space, ensuring that our message is both compelling and omnipresent. And we must build the capacity for long-term resilience by empowering progressive creators, fostering media literacy, and creating a resilient public sphere that can counter the dangers of authoritarianism. In essence, our strategy is a single cohesive mission to create a democratic information ecosystem that is well-funded, resilient, and capable of standing up to the threats we face. By doing so, we can ensure that truth and democratic values prevail. Thank you for all of your dedication. Let's get to work and let's win this together. And if you live in Virginia, your first call to action is to vote for our Democratic slate this November and to put in place a supportive governing and legal scaffolding to underpin our efforts. This completes our forum, and we thank you for joining us.